a full bust adjustment, but on a princess seam design. You asked, so that's what we're going to be talking about today for today's Tricky Thursday. How to do an FBA or a full bust adjustment for the princess seam. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Trisha, your pattern nerd friend, and I'm here to talk about all things pattern making, fitting, and sewing. Today we're diving into the FBA, otherwise known as the full bust adjustment for the princess seam style bodice. I'm following up on a comment that I received from one of my last Read the Wrinkles series about the full bust adjustment. We did it before with a bust start pointing down at the waist, adjusted it so we knew how much to add in the bust area to create the full bust adjustment. That comment that we saw earlier is based off of that video where I mentioned that if someone wants me to dive in more to different full bust adjustments, I would be happy to do so. So we're starting with this one. A princess seam design is a very popular design for a lot of bodices. So this is probably something you're likely to see if you're doing a lot of sewing and if you find that you need a full bust adjustment on occasion. This particular princess seam design goes all the way up to the shoulder. There are princess seam designs that go into the armhole. It would work similarly the same way if you were dealing with an armhole princess. So just keep that in mind as we're going through. Now, since this is part of the Read the Wrinkles series, we are talking about what we can do with the full bust adjustment once you've already sewn up the mock-up. Now, what I'm going to be sharing with you would not be able to adjust something that is already a finished garment, adding room in there. So we're thinking about what are we going to do? How are we going to find what we need in the mock-up and fitting part of your creation journey and taking it back to the pattern to make that adjustment that you need before you're cutting into your final fabric. I wanted to show this way of adding the full bust adjustment because there's a lot of things out on the internet that show you how to adjust it from the pattern only, but sometimes you don't notice that you need it until you're already in the fitting. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do you know that you need this adjustment? What steps do you do so that you know you're adding the right amount and going to get the finished product that you're looking for? So let's start off and look at the signals that are telling us that Miss Susie, by the way, if I haven't introduced you, this is Miss Susie. She's my muse and my model. But what on Miss Susie's bodice right now is telling us that she might need more room in her bust. So while I think this is something that you can actually see as somebody doing the fitting, obviously if you're fitting it on yourself, you're going to feel this as well. But this kind of adjustment, I think, is more of a feeling adjustment, but there are some wrinkles that we can look at that will identify that this is what needs to happen on this bodice. It's hard to tell, it's hard to see, but you may see a little bit of wrinkles coming from here, a little bit of gapping in the armhole. There's some wrinkles pointing up from the side seam as well. And there's even on this one, a little bit of gapping and wrinkling from the neck. So if we were to highlight those, so we've got gapping here in the armhole, we've got some wrinkling and that coming from our side seam, and we have a little bit of gapping and things coming from the neck. So everything is pointing to the bust. So that's a big indicator that there needs to be more space and more room in the bust area. Now, one thing that we can't really see so easily on this mock-up, but if Susie could talk and tell me how she feels, she would say that she's also feeling tightness like in between her bust and tightness across the chest here. So if you're feeling any of those things or you're seeing these kinds of symbols and signs, this could indicate that you need to do a full bust adjustment. Now, the great thing about doing it after you've already done the mock-up is that we can find out exactly how much we need to add in this area to have this be a comfortable step. So let me get my supplies ready and then we'll come back and do that modification in the mock-up so that we can show you exactly how to measure and know how much to add. For supplies, we want to have some scissors, some grosgrain ribbon or any ribbon that does not stretch. We'll show you how to use that. And of course, safety pins. so that we can make those adjustments. When you find that this is what you need for your bodice and in the mock-up fitting, then you want to go ahead and take your scissors and cut into the center, right into the center like this, and you want to try to cut as straight as you can right across the bust area, going in both directions. Once you get to the bust area, you want to angle your cut up to the armhole. We're going to cut to but not through into that armhole on both sides. So now you see what we have is we can open up this space right here in the bust area so that it doesn't go all loosey-goosey and we get the information that we need. This is where our grosgrain ribbon comes into place. So what we want to do with the ribbon is we want to pin it right between both sides of the bust so that we know how much room we want to add in that area. This step is always a little bit fiddly, so I did the first side off camera, but we can do this one together. You want to make sure you're catching the ribbon on both sides and obviously not poking your model as much as you can. Susie doesn't mind, but if you have a live model, they might. Make sure that you have enough room in between now for the bust. Now, sometimes getting these even is a little tricky, so it might take a few times. That's why I wanted to show you that it's not just super easy for me either. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is notice how my seam is coming open because I cut right through it, right? So on this side, I went ahead and used a safety pin to hold it closed. And this is what we're looking for. So we want to have two of those ribbons holding the space in between of how much you think you might want to add to give space in this area. And I like this method because the wearer, the person that you're fitting, can actually feel what this feels like, breathe, move, and really get an idea of if this is going to be enough space or not. And notice we don't have those wrinkles along the side anymore. We don't have the gapping at the neck and the armhole. Now we're ready to go to pattern. Let's dive in. Now, in order to know what to adjust on the pattern, our little ribbons help us out. You want to measure that space in between the ribbon. On mine, it's about 3/4 of an inch. So if this was full scale, it'd be 1.5 inches. So once you have that information, then you can go to the pattern. Here's our front pattern that we started with, the center front and the side front. You'll want to know where that bust level is. There's a lot of different ways to figure that out. I just laid the pattern on top of my mock-up and figured out that right there is about where the bust level was, where I started adding space. So I want to draw a line that is perpendicular 90 degrees from our center front at the bust level because that's where we will be opening and adding that space. Now you also want to make sure that you're adding it at the same level on the side bust side. So I have a little mark there and we want to give ourselves a slash line up to the armhole. Where it meets at the armhole is not necessarily important, but notice how this is similar to the slash that we did in the fitting on our little Susie. Now, to make this adjustment, these are going to be our slash lines. We're just going to cut right along here. Now, normally I'd put this onto new paper, but I want to show you this change so you can also just tape some paper in. I'm just going to use these sticky notes because they're handy and you can see the contrast. So I usually tape down one of the sides, the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter, either one. I also like to draw the center line, you know, because it's a straight line. I want to make sure I'm staying in line with everything. Then what I want to do is whatever the amount that I'm opening up this space, in my case, it's 3/4 of an inch. So yours might be different on what you found in your fitting, but I'm going to go ahead and draw that line up the amount that I measured in the fitting before I tape my top part on here and go ahead, line it up with my center front line and tape it down. That's what I'm going to do for my center front. Now for the side front, I'm going to cut in from my princess seam up to but not through my armhole. Now if I had seam allowance in this armhole, I would want to make sure that this is my pivot on the stitching line. In this case, I don't have seam allowance, so I don't need to worry about it. And this having seam allowance isn't as much of a big deal either. So we cut to but not through into the armhole so that we have a hinge here. And then we want to open it up the same amount we opened up the center. So again, I will show you with a sticky note so you can see the contrast. You just want to tape one side down, and then you open this up about the same amount that you opened up your center. So I'm going to measure. It's about 3/4 of an inch there. You can also look and see how close you got. Now, of course, you're going to have to blend. So what I do in this case is, this is where I am at the top, this is where I am at the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of try to meet somewhere in the middle when I'm blending this, like so. And then we'll have to put seam allowance back on. And you'll want to blend anything on this side as well. So this is our corrected pattern. So we opened up the amount that we found in the fitting, in our center front and our side front. And of course you'll want to walk this seam and maybe add some notches, but you can see we opened up the same amount there, and that should give you the room that you need in your bust area. And here you have it. This is the corrected pattern after it's been cut out and sewn up again. She obviously has more space in her bust area. And I think if Susie could tell us, that she would tell us that she feels a lot less tightness across her bust. We don't have that gapping in the neck or the armhole anymore. We don't have those real distinct drag lines coming up from the side seam and everything pointing to the bust. So that's how you know you've done it correctly. Hopefully you found this helpful. And as always, please hit that subscribe button, share this with your friends. Please hit that like button if you found this helpful, because that really does help me to keep creating and finding new ways to help you with your fitting journey. Now, if you are loving this kind of thing, besides hitting that subscribe button, you want to make sure you're on my pattern news list, which is down below. That's our email newsletter where you can hear about all of the fun and exciting things that we might have going on outside of our little YouTube channel here. That's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.